Most haunted hotels don't start with proof. They start with stories. A woman in white seen at the end of a corridor. A shadow where there should be none. Footsteps that appear after midnight and stop when someone opens the door. 1408 stands apart from all of that. There is no figure, no familiar ghost waiting to be identified. The room itself becomes the problem, a space that seems to react to whoever enters it, as if it has its own memory of what has happened inside its walls. When Stephen King's story was later adapted into a film, what stayed with audiences wasn't a single scare. It was the idea that a place could turn against the people inside it without needing anything visible to explain why. That idea didn't come from nowhere. Long before 1408 existed as fiction, hotel rooms had already developed reputations in real life, not through legends passed down in books, but through small, repeated reports from guests who never met each other. Hotels are built for short stays. People arrive, leave their belongings, sleep, and move on. The rooms reset every time the door closes behind a guest. But not everything resets cleanly. A housekeeper notices a room that feels different from the rest of the floor. A guest mentions sounds that don't match the building structure. A maintenance worker avoids certain corridors without being told why. None of this ever proves anything on its own, but when you speak to people who have actually stayed in these places, the way they describe certain rooms starts to sound strangely similar. Some of them don't even talk about anything happening. They just say they didn't sleep properly in that room, or that they kept checking the door more than usual without knowing why. Housekeepers sometimes mention a room they would rather not be assigned to alone, even when nothing has ever happened there during their shift. And occasionally, someone will mention a room number as if they've already heard about it before they ever set foot inside it, even though no one had told them anything in advance. That is how these reputations form. Slowly, quietly, without a single defining moment. And once they exist, they tend to stay. In the 1950s, actor Montgomery Clift stayed at the Hollywood Roosevelt while filming From Here to Eternity. At the time, he was one of Hollywood's most recognizable young stars. The hotel was busy almost every night, filled with actors, musicians, producers, and staff moving through the same corridors. Room 928 did not carry any particular reputation during his stay. It was simply another room in a working hotel. The stories began years later. After Clift had already left, employees started mentioning noises coming from that part of the building. Footsteps were heard in corridors that had already been checked and cleared. At night, some staff reported sounds that resembled someone practicing music alone, even though no one could be found inside the rooms when they were opened. One account describes a staff member entering a room near that area and suddenly feeling a tap on his shoulder. He turned immediately, expecting someone behind him, but there was nobody there. The room was empty, and the corridor outside was silent. Over time, these scattered reports became linked to Clift's name, not through any official record, but through repetition among staff who worked the same shifts and heard the same stories from those who came before them. There was never any confirmed explanation, only a growing association that followed the room long after the actor had gone. The Roosevelts carried another story as well, one that did not come from corridors or empty rooms, but from something far more personal. Marilyn Monroe had stayed at the hotel early in her career, before she became one of the most recognizable figures in Hollywood. A mirror from that period was reportedly kept within the building, and over time it developed its own set of stories. Guests and staff occasionally described seeing a reflection that did not match the room, a blonde figure appearing briefly behind them in the glass, a presence that seemed to linger for a moment longer than expected before disappearing when they turned around. No one ever produced a photograph that confirmed it. No investigation ever reached a conclusion. The accounts remained as they were told, brief, uncertain, and impossible to verify. Just enough to stay in circulation. And that is often how these places gain their reputation. Not through a single event, but through many small reports that accumulate over time, until the room number or object becomes something people recognize without needing explanation. The Roosevelts eventually became one of those places. And it is not the only one. Kate Morgan, whose real name was Kate Farmer, arrived at the Hotel Del Coronado in California in November 1892. She checked in alone under the name Lottie A. Bernard. From the moment she arrived, hotel staff remembered her as unusual not because she caused any disturbance, but because she seemed to be waiting for someone who never arrived. She spent most of her time moving around the property, standing in the lobby, walking along the shoreline, or staying on the hotel veranda while looking toward the entrance, as if expecting someone to walk through the doors at any moment. When asked directly by a staff member if she was waiting for someone, she said her brother would be arriving soon, but no one ever came for her. In the days that followed, her routine did not change. She did not attend social events, she did not interact with other guests, and she kept to herself almost entirely, often sitting alone outside and watching the train lines in the distance as if she was waiting for a specific time or arrival. On the night of November 29th, she left the hotel. Later that night, she was seen near the beach area walking alone. The following morning, a maintenance worker discovered her body on a staircase leading down toward the shoreline. She had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, and a firearm was found beside her. Authorities ruled the case as a suicide, but several details were never fully settled. She had purchased the weapon shortly before her death, despite having little experience with firearms, and later reviews of the wound raised questions that were never conclusively answered. Even today, there is no agreement on what she was truly waiting for, or why she came to the hotel alone in the first place. According to the story, the guest never returned to that room. Another account tells of a couple staying near the room associated with Kate Morgan. At around 3 a.m, the husband was awakened by the sound of someone crying. Just quiet, heartbreaking weeping coming from somewhere inside the darkness. He assumed it was another guest. The crying continued for several minutes. Eventually, he got out of bed and opened the door. The corridor was empty. The crying stopped instantly. When he returned to the room, his wife was sitting upright in bed, pale, shaking. Before he could say anything, she asked him the same question she had been too afraid to ask while he was gone.
"Did you hear her too?"
Stories like these are unsettling, but they still leave room for doubt. Footsteps can be explained. Strange sounds can be blamed on old buildings. The next hotel on our list is different, because the story begins with a man who actually stayed there. In 1974, Stephen King and his wife checked into the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. It was late in the season, just before the hotel shut down for winter. Most guests had already left, and the building felt almost abandoned in parts. Long corridors stayed empty for most of the night, and entire sections of the hotel were quiet in a way that felt unusual, even for an old mountain resort. King later described walking through the hotel alone, passing through rooms that were lit but unused, a dining hall with no service, and hallways where his footsteps echoed longer than expected because there was no one else around to absorb the sound. That night, he went to sleep and had a dream about his young son running through empty corridors, being chased by something he could not see. He woke up suddenly and stayed awake for the rest of the night. By morning, he was already writing notes. Those notes became the foundation of The Shining. The Stanley itself never officially presented itself as a haunted hotel, but over the years, guests began reporting experiences that did not fit easily into normal explanations. Some described hearing children running through upper corridors when the hotel was nearly empty. Others mentioned laughter in hallways outside their rooms, followed by silence the moment they opened the door. Among these accounts, one room was mentioned more often than others. Room 217. A chambermaid named Elizabeth Wilson was seriously injured in 1911 when a gas explosion tore through part of the Stanley Hotel. She survived the incident, but the room she was associated with never quite lost its reputation after that. In the years that followed, guests began reporting things that were hard to place into a normal explanation. Some woke up to find their luggage opened and unpacked. Others said objects in the room had been moved while they were asleep, even though they remembered leaving everything in order before going to bed. There were also accounts of something more direct. A few guests described waking in the middle of the night and seeing a woman standing near the end of the bed, not moving, not speaking, just there long enough to be clearly noticed before disappearing without any obvious exit. One visitor said he assumed she was hotel staff and told her to leave. According to his account, she turned and walked into the bathroom. When he got up and followed after switching on the light, the room was empty. The bathroom was empty as well, with no sign that anyone had been there. Stories like these continued to surface over time, becoming part of what people associated with the Stanley. Not as a single confirmed event, but as a pattern repeated by different guests who never knew each other. And that is also where the idea behind 1408 begins to make sense. More like a room that stays with someone after they have already left it. Something changes, but there is never a clear moment where anyone can say what changed. People describe waking up during the night for no reason they can explain, lying there for a while before sleeping again, or not sleeping properly at all. Housekeepers mention rooms they remember, sometimes without anything specific happening in them during their shift. And over time, the same kinds of descriptions begin to appear from people who have never met and never compared notes. But the accounts keep sounding familiar in the way they are described. A commonly shared account from online paranormal forums describes a stay at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, originally posted by a guest who said they had booked a room without knowing much about the hotel's reputation. According to the post, the guest checked in late in the evening and spent most of the night alone in the room. They described the hotel as quiet at first, with long periods where nothing seemed unusual. During the early hours of the morning, they reported waking up suddenly without any clear reason. The room was still dark, and there were no sounds coming from the corridor. At first, they assumed it was just normal sleep interruption. A short time later, they said they became aware of movement outside the room, described as faint footsteps passing near the door and then stopping. When they checked the hallway, there was nobody present, and the corridor was empty in both directions. The account continued, with the guests stating they remained awake for the rest of the night. They did not report seeing any figure or direct visual event, only repeated interruptions of sleep, and the feeling that the room was no longer quiet for extended periods. By morning, they had already decided to check out earlier than planned. The original post did not describe any dramatic encounter or appearance, and it ended simply as a personal account of an uncomfortable stay rather than a confirmed incident. The guests did not report anything visual during the stay, and there was no claim of a figure or presence being seen inside the room. What remained was only the pattern of the night itself. Waking up without a clear reason, checking the room and finding nothing unusual, hearing movement that could not be confirmed once investigated. By the time morning came, the experience had already lost any way of being proven and remained only as a written account shared after checkout. And like many similar reports from other hotels, it exists now only as a description passed between strangers who were never in the same room. If you want to explore more stories like this, follow the channel for more hotel cases, urban legends, and real accounts behind the world's most talked about rooms.